Ciao a tutti amici di Saldapress, ci troviamo con Simon Spurrier e Charlie Adlard per fare qualche domanda insieme a proposito del loro nuovissimo libro, della loro nuovissima serie Damn Them All, una serie horror esoterica che vi sta piacendo tantissimo. Partirei subito con le domande. Dunque, Damn Them All è una serie horror, una serie esoterica, una serie che parla di occultismo, di magia, di spiritualità, una serie prevalentemente horror, come ci hanno abituato le produzioni sia di Simon Spurrier che di Charlie Adlard. Nello specifico Damn Them All è una storia che parla di orrore, un orrore reale, un orrore sociale, un orrore realmente calato nella contemporaneità urbana europea. Dunque io vorrei chiedere a Simon Spurrier e a Charlie Adlard qual è il vostro rapporto con la società, con l'orrore e la società, nello specifico quanto dell'orrore reale confluisce poi nell'orrore letterario.
I'll hop in. I suppose the most important thing for me, the thing that I think makes Damn Them All quite intriguing and unique, is that we start with something quite familiar to readers of genre fiction, this idea of demons being somehow out and about in the real world. But then we make the point that they're not the villains of the piece. The problem is that when you have something like that, a resource, a magical resource, human people who are greedy and manipulative and avaricious are going to use that resource in selfish and self-aggrandizing ways. And that's the problem. It's not that there is some deep religious evil, it's that people are awful if they're given the chance to be awful. And that's how I think you can use horror in interesting ways to talk about the human condition.
Yeah, and I just enjoy drawing a great script. It's as simple as that. But for my own personal style, I like to keep things very grounded, and that's what drew me in. It takes a lot to draw me back into horror. I've done enough of it in my time, so I'm a reluctant person to want to come back into that genre again. You know, I'd like to sort of spread my wings a bit. So yeah, as I keep reiterating, it's size script which did in fact draw me in. You know, on the premise that obviously we were going to go from that basis and then expand out.
Io vorrei approfondire questo discorso sull'orrore, sulla paura, sull'horror appunto, e allora vi chiedo da esperti della narrazione orrorifica, qual è il segreto per una buona storia horror? Quali sono gli elementi imprescindibili per una storia horror, sia che sia una serie lunga di fumetti, sia che sia un volume unico? Ecco, qual è il segreto dell'horror a fumetti?
Well, I mean, the older I get, the more I'm interested in horror that's not, I suppose, the obvious sort of horror. I'm not interested in whether it's film, TV, books, comics, whatever. The boo, jump scare, gore sort of horror. My should we say, my favourite movies tend to be more psychological. So, and like I say, the older I get, the more I feel that I'm more drawn to that side rather than the other side. So that's what as I keep saying, that's what I like to seek. In the scripts that I draw. And of course, horror in comics is really hard to do, I always feel, because by the very nature of turning the page, you can't do the boo jump scare stuff because it can't exist, because obviously the reader can look beyond that and see what's going on. So it's really hard to rack up tension and things like that in comics. And it's sort of similar in novels actually as well. It's really hard to rack up that sort of anticipation that the pure visual image, moving image can do. So I always say it's it's more interesting. So the challenge is more interesting then to do horror in another way. So whether it's social, whether it's sort of ideas, things like that is much more exciting to me than just sort of trying to mimic another media, to be honest. And we all know comics is a medium all in itself. So let's try and do horror specifically for that medium, rather than trying to do trying to grab something from television or film and trying to sort of shoehorn it into our own medium.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better. There's some clever formalist tricks you can play in comics which help you to control the pace and the speed, so that when you deliver those beats, they're hitting harder. But no, we don't have access to a big boo moment, and that's probably just as well, because if we did, we would overuse it. So it follows that in comics, more so I guess than in novels, for multiple reasons, the way that horror works is to be unnerving, to get under people's skin, to make people imagine themselves in these scenarios, to get them thinking about things that they may not have thought about. I sort of question whether Damn Them All is a horror. We sort of presented it in those terms because it's got demons in it and it's about magic, and it certainly works when you present it as such. But when you kind of dig down into it, it's more of a crime story or a sort of conspiracy thriller in which people are using a new resource to gain power, to be awful. And it just so happens that this new resource is occult, is esoteric and abstruse, but it could be anything. It could be a new gun on the street, or a new medicine, or anything. It sort of fit. There's something quite beautiful about crime and magic coinciding. They're both quite sinister and cloaked, and they both involve an awful lot of kind of ritual and coded messages and not speaking plainly. And when you introduce somebody like Ellie, our main character, to that, who does speak plainly and has no truck with being mysterious or ritualistic, she just says what she thinks and she gets it done. That's a really interesting mix. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, whereas it works as a horror, I don't know that it is one.
Io mi avvierei alla conclusione con una terza e ultima domanda. Sono una domanda relativa a cose che magari in parte avete anche già toccato, però vorrei approfondire. Il fumetto, l'autore lo fa per il lettore, lo fa per il pubblico, e sappiamo che oggigiorno, penso banalmente proprio al catalogo Saldapress, le storie horror sono veramente tantissime. Però mi chiedo, visto anche i libri horror, i film horror, ecco, in un film fare paura è facile. Vuoi la musica, vuoi i jump scare, vuoi il cambio di fotocamera, il cambio di appunto crescendo di tensione. In un fumetto è più difficile fare paura, quindi ecco, quanto è difficile creare paura a fumetti, e soprattutto poi quale tipo di reazione cercate e vi aspettate dal vostro pubblico?
I think for me personally, there's the mind can conjure up images much worse than anything you can show. A prime example, if you're talking about movies, is how fortuitous was it that the shark in Jaws didn't work and the alien in Alien looked like a man in a costume. By those limitations, those two filmmakers were forced to do other ways of depicting the horror, the thriller, the whatever you want to call it, and both those films became much more improved by that fact. So because you imagined the alien, you imagined the shark. So personally, I always think it's much more horrific to have stuff off screen most of the time. to convey that sort of sense of just get the mind just rattling through, and if you can affect the mind, I think that's a lot more powerful than just presenting something really obvious and going, here it is, because then all the magic has completely been blown, and you're just having sort of a more visceral experience with it, rather than a more, sort of something a lot more profound, I think.
Yeah, totally agree. One of the problems of it being a serial, like Damn Them All was released in a monthly form, is that if you start from a position of saying, this is a book about a bunch of demons and there's going to be demons appearing in each of these issues, you sort of can't help but occasionally show the audience the thing. There's the big page turn, the big beat. And, we worried about that for all the reasons Charlie's talking about, because once you've done that, that's it. You've shot your load. You've shown them the big scary monster. There's no coming back. The two interesting things are, first of all, Charlie's so good at showing the monster that it makes people go, oh, cool, I want to see more of that. So, it drags you on anyway. The second thing is, as I mentioned earlier on, we sort of increasingly realized that we didn't have to worry about those problems with the horror tension, the sort of the keeping things hidden behind the curtain of it all, because the deeper we got, the more we realized we're not playing that game. We're presenting something as a horror, but we're sort of lying about that. As soon as people are past the first issue, they're realizing this isn't about big scary demons. It's about big scary people who are using scary demons. And then that's a nice way of just taking all of those stresses and pressures of how are we going to keep the monsters mysterious, how are we going to keep everything in shadow, how are we going to keep presenting bigger and bigger visual beats that get people so much more excited than the previous one. We didn't have to worry about that. All we had to do was keep the story compelling, keep the human actors honest and truthful, and present them in ways that made you feel like they were real and you could inhabit the story around them. And nobody does that better than Charlie, and I think the characters just sort of lived. So it doesn't matter that we don't get to see a fucking great demon every second panel, because that's not the point. The point is we know what it is to be in this world where something new and strange is suddenly available to people on the street, and that's changed everything, and people have to start thinking differently. And I think that's probably more effectively horrifying than any number of big spooky monster shots.
Ok, grazie a tutti. Queste sono le domande che abbiamo voluto fare a Charlie Adlard e Simon Spurrier, gli autori della recentissima serie salda per Damn Them All, una serie horror-esoterica, ne avete sentito parlare, questo era un po' l'orrore secondo Simon Spurrier e Charlie Adlard. Se avete ulteriori domande da sottoporre agli autori e nello specifico a Charlie Adlard, potete incontrarlo, come ben sapete, sia al Nerd Show di Bologna che nelle fumetterie Fanside di Torino e di Milano. C'è tutto un mini tour che trovate annunciato sui nostri social e nelle fumetterie di Fanside, appunto. Questo è quanto, io vi ringrazio per averci seguiti, vi aspettiamo in fiera e ovviamente tra le pagine di un fumetto. Ciao a tutti!